The Dakota wind carried two things that night: the scent of pine and the metallic tang of fear. For Josephine Bell, a woman shackled to a dead man's name, the choice was simple yet impossible. Hiding the wounded Lakota scout in the root cellar was an act of defiance against the world that had branded her. But defiance has a price, paid in gunpowder and blood. By the time the sun bled across the horizon, the price had come due. The thunder wasn't a storm, it was the hoofbeats of the 7th Cavalry, and they had surrounded the ranch. Her father's legacy had been a cage, but that morning it would become a tomb or a fortress. The Bellwether Ranch was a place of ghosts. It clung to a low rise in the shadow of the Black Hills, a testament to the stubbornness of Josephine Bell's father, Jedediah. He had been a ghost himself for 5 years, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and grudging respect from dusty saloons in Deadwood to the halls of Fort Meade. Jedediah Bell, the outlaw, the rustler, the man who had carved out this piece of unforgiving land with a cult peacemaker and an iron will. Now all that remained of him was the ranch and his daughter Josephine, who felt more like its caretaker than its owner. Josie was 24, but the harsh Dakota sun and the weight of her father's reputation had etched lines of a much older woman around her eyes. She had his sharp jawline and his pale, watchful eyes, but none of his restless cruelty. Where Jedediah had seen the land as something to be broken and conquered, Josie saw its stark, lonely beauty. She managed the small herd of cattle left to her, with the help of a single aging ranch hand, Clem Peterson, a man whose loyalty was as thin as his graying hair. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the vast sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. Josie was mending a split-rail fence at the far edge of the property, the rhythmic thud of her hammer, a lonely counterpoint to the sighing of the wind through the tall prairie grass. It was then that she saw it, a smudge of dust on the horizon, moving too fast for a lone rider, too erratically for a stagecoach. Her hand instinctively went to the worn handle of the revolver holstered on her hip, a habit ingrained since childhood. In this territory, unexpected visitors were rarely good news. The dust cloud resolved into a single rider, slumped low over his horse's neck. The animal was running on pure panic, its sides heaving, foam flying from its mouth. Even from a distance, Josie could see the dark stain spreading across the rider's buckskin shirt. He wasn't just hurt, he was dying on his feet, or rather in his saddle. Her first instinct, the one Jedediah had drilled into her, was to turn away. Trouble that came looking for you was the worst kind. Let it pass. But then the horse stumbled, its legs finally giving out. The rider was thrown clear landing in a crumpled heap in the grass, not 200 yards from her fence line. The horse, with a final shuddering gasp, lay still. Josie hesitated for a heartbeat, her mind a battlefield of ingrained caution and a compassion she tried so hard to suppress. Then, cursing under her breath, she dropped the hammer and ran. The man was Lakota. His long black hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and a beaded amulet lay against his chest stained with his own blood. A deep gash, crusted and angry, ran down his left leg, but the more serious wound was in his side, a ragged, dark hole that oozed blood with every shallow breath he took. His face, etched with pain, was strong and proud, even in unconsciousness. He wore the trousers of a U.S. Army scout, but the rest of his attire was traditional Lakota. A contradiction. A dangerous one. She knelt beside him, pressing her palm against the wound in his side. He flinched, a low groan escaping his lips, but his eyes remained closed. He was burning with fever. Josie looked back towards the west, the direction he'd come from. There was nothing but the empty prairie and the setting sun. But she knew. A man didn't get a wound like this from falling off his horse. He was being hunted. "Clem!" she yelled, her voice carried away by the wind. There was no answer. He was likely back at the barn, napping or nursing a bottle of cheap whiskey. She was on her own. Dragging him was impossible. He was a solidly built man, and she would leave a trail a blind man could follow. Her mind raced, sifting through the lessons of a life spent on the edge of law and civilization. Jedediah had been a paranoid man. His paranoia had built this ranch, and it had built its secrets. The root cellar. It was dug deep into the earth beneath the main house, accessible by a heavy trap door hidden under a bearskin rug in the parlor. It was cool, dark, and most importantly defensible. With a surge of adrenaline, Josie hoisted the man into a fireman's carry. The effort made her grunt, her muscles screaming in protest. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Staggering, she began the long walk back to the ranch house, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every shadow seemed to move, every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. She was no longer just Josephine Bell, the quiet rancher. She was Jedediah Bell's daughter, and she was bringing trouble home. She half dragged, half carried him through the back door, leaving a smear of blood on the threshold. Clem was nowhere to be seen. Good. The less he knew, the better. Inside the parlor, the air was thick with the scent of old leather and wood smoke. She shoved the heavy oak table aside, rolled back the worn rug, and heaved open the trap door, revealing a set of steep wooden steps leading down into darkness. Getting him down was a controlled fall. She braced his weight against her body, sliding and stumbling down the steps until they landed on the cool, packed earth floor below. The cellar smelled of damp soil potatoes and dust. She laid him gently on a pile of old blankets, his breathing a harsh, ragged sound in the sudden silence. Lighting a kerosene lamp, she saw the true extent of his injuries. The bullet had gone clean through his side, but the wound was already showing signs of infection. She worked quickly, her hands moving with a practiced efficiency she hadn't used in years. She had patched up more than her share of her father's men in this very cellar. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from a hidden flask, Jedediah's emergency reserve, causing the man to cry out in a delirium. She stitched the torn flesh with a needle and thread she kept for mending saddles, her jaw clenched in concentration. Finally, she bandaged him with strips torn from a clean bedsheet. As she worked, she found it. Tucked into his belt was a folded, blood-stained piece of paper. A dispatch. Her hands trembling slightly, she unfolded it. It was from the desk of a Captain Marcus Thorne, 7th Cavalry, Fort Meade. It authorized the bearer, a scout named Chayton, to track a small band of renegade Lakota. It was dated 3 days ago. A cold dread settled in Josie's stomach. This man Chayton wasn't a renegade. He was one of them, an army scout, which meant the people hunting him were not outlaws or vigilantes. They were the United States Cavalry, and she, the daughter of the infamous Jedediah Bell, had just hidden one of their own from them. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She had spent her entire life trying to escape her father's shadow, and in one reckless act of compassion, she had stepped right back into the world of secrets, lies, and running from the law. The ghost of Jedediah Bell would have laughed. The root cellar became a world unto itself, a pocket of silence and shadows beneath the floorboards of Josie's life. For 2 days, the Lakota scout Chayton drifted in and out of a fevered consciousness. Josie became a creature of the dark, slipping down the steep steps to tend to him, bringing cool water broth and fresh bandages. She listened to his fevered murmurs, disjointed words in the Lakota tongue, mixed with English phrases, Blue Coats, Bitter Creek, Thorne, and lies. On the third morning she descended the steps to find him awake. His eyes, the color of dark, polished obsidian, were clear and focused on her. He had tried to sit up, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife still sheathed at his belt. He watched her every move with the wary stillness of a hawk. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "The Bellwether Ranch." Josie replied, setting down a bowl of stew and a tin cup of water. "You were about to bleed out on my property. Seemed a shame to let you ruin the grass." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face. He took the water she offered, drinking slowly. "My thanks," he said, his gaze sweeping the cellar, taking in the shelves of preserved goods, the barrels of salted meat, and the single barred window high on the stone wall that let in a sliver of pale light. "This cage is better than a grave. Don't get too comfortable," Josie said, her tone sharper than she intended. "The moment you can ride, you're gone." "Ride where?" He countered, his eyes locking with hers. "They will be looking for me." The Cavalry, Captain Thorne." The name from the dispatch. "The dispatch in your belt said you were one of them," Josie stated, crossing her arms. "A scout." Pain deeper than his physical wounds clouded his features. "I was," he admitted. "I tracked for them. I thought I could guide them toward peace. Bridge the two worlds. I was a fool." He looked down at his bandaged side. "They don't want peace. They want silence. They want the land." He wouldn't say more, and Josie didn't press. A man on the run had a right to his secrets. The less she knew, the less she could tell if when the cavalry came knocking. The question hung in the air between them. Why were they hunting their own scout life above ground? Became a performance. Josie went about her chores with a forced nonchalance, her ears constantly strained for the sound of approaching riders. Every time Clem Peterson looked at her, his watery, bloodshot eyes lingering a moment too long, a knot of anxiety tightened in her gut. Clem was a relic of her father's time, a man who had ridden with Jedediah's gang in his younger, more ambitious days. Now he was just a sour, resentful old man, content to drink his share of the ranch's meager profits. He had seen the bloodstain on the back porch. Josie had claimed a coyote had tried to get at the chickens, and she'd shot it, dragging the carcass out to the ravine. Clem had just grunted, his expression unreadable, but Josie knew he didn't believe her. He was watching, waiting. He smelled trouble, and Clem's only allegiance was to his own hide. "You're jumpy as a cat in a room full of rockers, Josie," he commented one afternoon as she oiled her rifle on the porch, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just keeping my eyes open," she retorted. "This is Bell land, always someone thinking they can take it. Ain't been no one fool enough to try since your pa died," Clem said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Most folks are happy to give this place a wide berth." He squinted at her. "Unless you've gone and given 'em a reason to come calling." The veiled accusation was clear. Josie's grip tightened on the rifle. "Just do your work, Clem. I'll worry about who comes calling." Down in the cellar, Chayton was healing. The fever broke, and his strength slowly returned. In the long hours they spent in the lamplit gloom, a tentative connection formed. He spoke of the Black Hills Paha Sapa, not as a place of gold and timber, but as the heart of the world, a sacred land breathing with the spirits of his ancestors. He taught her a few words in his language, his voice soft as he described the constellations he could no longer see from his subterranean prison. Josie, in turn, found herself speaking of her father. Not the fearsome outlaw of legend, but the man who taught her how to track a deer, how to read the clouds for rain, and how to tell a bluff from a genuine threat. "He built this place to be a fortress," she told Chayton one evening, gesturing at the thick stone walls of the cellar. He always said the world was full of wolves, and the only way to survive was to have deeper holes and stronger walls than they did. He was not wrong, Chayton said quietly. But there are wolves who wear the uniforms of shepherds. The name Thorne came up again. Chayton described him as a man with a politician's smile and a hangman's heart. Ambitious, cruel, and obsessed with his reputation. He craves glory, Chayton explained. He wants to be the man who pacified the Black Hills. He will write his name in the history books with our blood if he has to. The longer Chayton stayed, the more the cellar felt less like a cage and more like a sanctuary, a fragile bubble of peace in a world poised to explode. But they both knew it was temporary. Every creak of the floorboards above, every distant coyote howl, was a reminder of the inevitable. One afternoon, Josie was checking the horses in the corral when she saw him. Clem, standing by the edge of the barn, was staring west towards the main trail leading to the ranch. There was an unnerving stillness about him. He thought he was unobserved. He shaded his eyes, looked for a long moment, then turned and scurried back into the barn, his movements furtive and deliberate. A cold certainty washed over Josie. He wasn't just suspicious. He was waiting. He had seen something, or he was expecting something. The wolves were no longer on the horizon. They were at the gate, and Clem Peterson was the one getting ready to unlatch it. The time for hiding was running out. She had to get Chayton away from the ranch, away from this trap. But as she turned to head back to the house, a new dust cloud appeared on the horizon. This one was organized, disciplined. It moved with the grim purpose of men who were not just passing through. They were coming for the Bellwether Ranch. The dust cloud resolved into 5 riders, their dark blue uniforms and the brass buttons on their jackets glinting in the afternoon sun. The 7th Cavalry. They rode with an arrogant assurance, as if the very land bowed to their presence. Josie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden ringing silence of the prairie. She had a minute, maybe 2. She strode calmly back to the house, her movements measured, betraying none of the panic that was clawing at her throat. "Clem!" she shouted, her voice sharp. "Got visitors!" She entered the parlor, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. Without breaking stride, she slid the heavy oak table back over the bearskin rug, concealing the trapdoor. She straightened a doily on a side table, her mind racing. Be calm. Be Jedediah's daughter, cold and hard as a coffin nail. The riders reined in, forming a neat line in the yard. The man at their center dismounted with a fluid grace. He was tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed mustache and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and pale. His uniform was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight. This had to be Captain Marcus Thorne. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice, smooth and cultured, completely out of place in the rugged landscape. He removed his hat, revealing sandy blonde hair. "Captain Thorne, 7th Cavalry. Apologies for the intrusion." Josie stepped onto the porch, letting the screen door slam shut behind her. She held her rifle loosely in the crook of her arm. "This is private property, Captain. What's your business?" Thorne's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Official business, I'm afraid. We're tracking a deserter, an army scout, a Lakota by the name of Chayton. You may have seen him. Rides a powerful bay, gelding, travels fast." Down below in the darkness, Chayton would have heard his name. He would be listening, his hand on his knife. "Can't say that I have," Josie replied, her voice flat. "The only person I've seen for a week is my hired hand." Right on cue, Clem emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He approached the soldiers with a subservient shuffle, his eyes wide and fearful. "Captain," he said, nodding his head obsequiously. "An honor, sir." Thorne gave Clem a dismissive glance before turning his attention back to Josie. His gaze was intense, probing. "You are Josephine Bell, are you not, Jedediah Bell's girl?" "I am," she said, her chin held high. The name was both a shield and a target. "Your father was a difficult man to track," Thorne said, conversationally, his eyes roaming over the ranch house, the sturdy barn, the well-maintained fences. "Cunning. Knew this land like the back of his hand. Qualities I can appreciate. I imagine some of that rubbed off on you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of suspicion. "I keep to myself, Captain. My father's business died with him." "Oh, did it?" Thorne walked slowly up the porch steps, his spurs chiming softly. He stopped just a few feet from her. The scent of leather and bay rum wafted from him. "We tracked our man this far. The trail went cold right around this area. It's almost as if the earth swallowed him up." He let the words hang in the air. Josie's blood ran cold. He knew, or he suspected, which was just as dangerous. She forced herself to meet his icy gaze. "The ground here is hard pan, Captain. A strong wind can wipe a trail clean in an hour. If you're any kind of tracker, you'd know that." Thorne chuckled a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, Chayton is the tracker, one of the best, which is what makes his disappearance so intriguing. He was wounded. A man losing blood doesn't just vanish. He seeks shelter. Help." His eyes flickered towards the house. "Even from unlikely sources." The psychological pressure was immense. He was toying with her, trying to break her composure. Every denial she uttered only seemed to confirm his suspicions in his mind. "Sergeant O'Malley," Thorne said, without turning around. "Search the barn. Take 2 men. Be thorough." A burly, red-faced sergeant grunted his assent and marched towards the barn. Clem scurried after them, eager to assist. "You have no warrant to search my property," Josie said, her voice low and dangerous. "Mama U.S. Army deserter is a federal matter," Thorne replied smoothly. "Warrants are a formality we can't always afford on the frontier. I'm sure a law-abiding citizen such as yourself has nothing to hide." The insult was clear. Law-abiding. The daughter of Jedediah Bell. He was mocking her, daring her to act the part of the outlaw's daughter, to give him the excuse he needed. She stood her ground as his men ransacked the barn, their shouts and the sound of overturned crates echoing across the yard. She could feel the weight of Chayton's presence beneath her feet, a secret that was growing heavier by the second. Her entire body was a tightly wound spring. After 10 minutes, Sergeant O'Malley returned. "Nothing, Captain. Barn's clean. Just a tired old man and some chickens." Thorne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. His gaze fell upon the dark stain on the back porch steps, the one Josie had tried to scrub away. "What's this?" he asked, pointing with the tip of his riding crop. "I told my man it was a coyote," Josie said, her heart leaping into her throat. Thorne knelt, touching the stain with his gloved finger. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. "Smells more like whiskey than coyote blood, Miss Bell. You must use a very peculiar method for cleaning up around here." He stood up, dusting off his glove. "Whiskey is good for cleaning wounds, I hear." He was directly over the trap door. The thin layer of wood and dirt was the only thing separating hunter from hunted. Josie could almost imagine. She felt the floorboards vibrating with the tension from the man below. Thorne stared at her for a long, silent moment. The wind whistled through the eaves of the porch, the only sound in a world holding its breath. He was weighing his options, calculating. He didn't have proof, only strong suspicion. To tear a homesteader's house apart without concrete evidence was a line even he was hesitant to cross. It could bring unwanted scrutiny from his superiors. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "Very well, Miss Bell," he said, his voice clipped. He stepped off the porch and swung himself elegantly into his saddle. But be advised, harboring a deserter is a serious crime. This man is not the noble warrior some might imagine. He is a traitor who turned on his own. He witnessed an unfortunate incident and lost his nerve. He is a dangerous liability. The captain gathered his reins. We'll be making camp a few miles east by the creek. If you happen to see or hear anything, I expect you to remember where your civic duty lies. He gave her one last, piercing look. We will find him, one way or another. With a nod to his men, he spurred his horse and led his patrol away, leaving another cloud of dust in their wake. Josie didn't move until they were a mere speck on the horizon. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the porch railing, her legs trembling, her knuckles white where she gripped the rifle. He hadn't found Chayton, but he had left a clear message. He wasn't just searching anymore. He was laying siege. He had encircled them, cutting off any hope of an easy escape. The ranch was no longer a sanctuary. It was an island, and the tide was coming in. Downstairs in the cellar, she heard a faint sound, the soft scrape of a knife being drawn from its sheath. The whispers on the wind had become a declaration of war. The silence left behind by the cavalry was heavier and more menacing than their presence had been. It was a silence filled with unspoken threats and the certainty of return. Josie waited a full hour watching the sun dip lower before she finally moved. The table pulled back the rug and lifted the heavy trapdoor. The lamplight from below cast a square of yellow onto the parlor floor. Chayton was standing at the bottom of the steps, his knife in his hand. His face, a grim mask. He had heard everything. "They know," he said. It wasn't a question. "Thorne suspects." Josie corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. "He was playing with me, trying to force my hand." She descended into the cellar, the trapdoor thudding shut behind her, plunging them back into their subterranean world. "He called you a traitor. Said you witnessed an unfortunate incident." Chayton sheathed his knife, his shoulders slumping slightly. He walked over to a stack of old crates and sat down heavily. "He has a gift for words," he said bitterly. "He calls a slaughter an incident." Josie waited, sensing that the dam of his silence was about to break. "We were tracking a small family band." Chayton began, his voice low and strained. "Shoshone, not Lakota. An old man, his wife, their 2 daughters and a son. They were not renegades. They were on their way to the reservation, traveling peacefully. Thorne had reports of gold being found near Bitter Creek, right where their ancestral lands were. The land was supposed to be protected by treaty, but a treaty is just paper to a man like Thorne." He looked at his hands, as if seeing the events replay on his skin. "He cornered them in a small canyon. I told him they were peaceful. He smiled and said that was unfortunate for them. He gave the order. It wasn't a battle. His troopers rode them down. The old man, the women, everyone. They shot them and left them for the vultures." The horror of it settled in the cold cellar air. This was the truth behind Thorne's ambition. "He needed a scapegoat," Chayton continued, "a reason for the incident. He claimed the Shoshone band had ambushed a patrol and that his scout me had led them into a trap. He said I was working with them. He fabricated a report and put out the warrant for my desertion. I am the only living witness who can tell the true story. That is why he hunts me. Not for desertion, for the truth." Now Josie understood. The cold, calculated cruelty. Thorne wasn't just a soldier. He was a murderer covering his tracks. And Chayton was not a traitor. He was an inconvenient conscience. "Why were you a scout for them in the first place?" Josie asked softly. "My father believed the future was in peace. Chayton explained. He thought that if some of us learned the white man's ways, we could speak for our people, protect them. He sent me to the Carlisle school. I learned to read your language to understand your laws. I became a scout to be a bridge. Instead, they used me to build a gallows. The weight of his story pressed down on Josie. Her own troubles, the shadow of her father's name, seemed small in comparison. She had offered a man shelter from a storm, only to find she had hidden him in the eye of a hurricane. "We need to get you out of here," she said, her voice firm with new resolve. "Thorne is camped nearby. He's watching us. A direct escape is impossible. He'll expect it." Her mind churned, thinking like her father would have. Jedediah never took the direct route. He used cunning misdirection and a deep knowledge of the land. And he used secrets. An idea began to form a memory from her childhood. "My father's study," she said aloud. She climbed the steps, and Chayton followed his limp, more pronounced now that the adrenaline had faded. Jedediah's study had been left untouched since his death, a shrine to a complicated man. It smelled of old paper gun oil and stale cigar smoke. A large roll-top desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with yellowed maps and shipping manifests. Josie went straight to a heavy locked chest in the corner. She pulled a small tarnished key from a chain around her neck and opened it. Inside were Jedediah's most personal effects, a pair of silver-inlaid spurs, a faded photograph of a woman Josie assumed was her mother, and several leather-bound ledgers. She pulled one out. It wasn't for cattle sales or ranch expenses. It was his private journal written in a surprisingly neat hand. She opened it, the pages crackling. The entries were sparse, detailing raids, sales of stolen livestock, and encounters with the law. But then she found what she was looking for. Tucked between 2 pages was a pressed blue feather and a small, intricate piece of quill work. Near it, an entry dated 10 years prior. Met with black buffalo. Traded 10 head for 4 fine ponies. He is a man of his word, unlike the agents at the fort. He says the soldiers see the hills but not the spirits within them. He is not wrong. He gave me this quill work for Josie. Says it will keep her safe from bad spirits. I have too many of my own to be saved. Josie stared at the entry, her breath catching in her throat. Black Buffalo was a renowned Lakota elder. Her father, the feared outlaw Jedediah Bell, had not just fought the world. He had quietly traded with its native people, respecting them in a way he respected few others. He had a connection, a secret history she never knew. She showed the entry to Chayton. He took the piece of quill work, his expression one of reverence. "This is from the family of Black Buffalo, my mother's uncle," he said in disbelief. "Your father, he knew my people." In that moment, Josie's fight to save Chayton became something more than an act of defiance against Captain Thorne. It became an extension of a hidden part of her own legacy. Her father wasn't just an outlaw, he was a man of contradictions, a man who understood that alliances could be found in the most unlikely of places. He had built this ranch as a fortress against the world, but he had also built bridges to another one. "He has another secret," Josie said, a surge of hope in her voice. She went to the wall behind the desk, which was covered by a large, detailed map of the Dakota Territory. She ran her fingers along the edge of the map, pressing certain points. With a low groan, a section of the bookshelf beside the desk swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. "He called it his bolt hole," Josie explained. "A tunnel. It leads out to a dry creek bed nearly a mile east of here, deep in a ravine. He built it in case the law ever managed to surround him completely. It was their only chance, a desperate gamble inherited from a dead outlaw. They could use the tunnel to slip past Thorne's watchful eyes, but they would have to move tonight. The full moon was in 2 days. They needed the cover of the darkest night. As they stood in the dusty, secret-filled room, a loud banging on the front door shattered the quiet. Josie's blood ran cold. It wasn't the polite knock of a cavalry officer. It was the frantic, terrified pounding of her ranch hand, Clem. Josie, open up, he's gone. The Lakota's horse. It's gone." Josie and Chayton exchanged a look of pure dread. Chayton's horse had been hidden in a thicket miles away to recover. If it was gone, it meant only one thing. Someone else knew. Someone had taken it. Or worse, someone had used it to send a message. Josie flung the door open. Clem stood there, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes darting nervously towards the darkening plains. "What are you talking about, Clem? What horse?" Josie demanded, her voice a low growl. "The bay. The one you told me was a stray you were nursing." Clem stammered, wringing his hands. "I went to check on it, give it some water like you said, and it's gone. The rope's been cut clean." Josie's mind raced. She and Chayton had hidden his recovered horse in a secluded copse of cottonwoods nearly 2 miles from the ranch, a place no one ever went. Only she knew it was there. And Clem, because she had needed an excuse for her comings and goings, and had invented a story about finding a lame stray. She had trusted him with a half-truth, and it had backfired spectacularly. "Did you see any tracks?" Chayton asked from the shadows of the doorway behind her. Clem jumped, letting out a small yelp as he saw the Lakota scout for the first time. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, backing away. "It's true. You've got him here. Josie, what have you done? Answer the question, Clem." Josie snapped, grabbing his arm. "Tracks. 1 set." Clem said, his voice trembling. "Rider heading east, towards the cavalry camp." The betrayal was a physical blow sucking the air from Josie's lungs. There was no stray rider, no thief. Clem hadn't just stumbled upon the missing horse. He had taken it. He had ridden to Thorne and told him everything, and this show of panic was a pathetic, cowardly performance. He had cut the rope himself. Her grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles turning white. "You!" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You rode to him, didn't you? You yellow-bellied snake. You sold us out." Clem's feigned terror dissolved into a sniveling defensiveness. "I had to Josie Thorne's men. They were sniffing around me, asking questions. They offered a reward, $100. What was I supposed to do? Die for him?" He jabbed a trembling finger at Chayton. "Die for Jedediah Bell's last mistake. Your father brought nothing but trouble to this valley, and you're just like him." The insult hit its mark. In a flash of rage, Josie drew her revolver, the click of the hammer being cocked, echoing in the twilight. She pressed the cold barrel against Clem's sweaty forehead. "You have no idea what my father was," she hissed. Clem whimpered, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "Don't kill me, Josie, please. I've got nothing. $100. It's more than I've seen in 10 years. "Your life is worth more than that," Chayton said calmly from the doorway. He put a restraining hand on Josie's arm. "He is not worth the bullet, or the time. Thorne knows. He will be moving now. We have lost our cover of darkness." He was right. Clem's betrayal hadn't just exposed them. It had accelerated Thorne's timeline. The captain would no longer wait or play psychological games. He had his proof the horse was his smoking gun. He would move to storm the ranch to take Chayton by force and silence him for good. The siege was no longer a waiting game. It was about to begin. Josie shoved Clem away in disgust. He stumbled backward and fell into the dust, sobbing. "Get out of my sight!" she spat. "Take your blood money and run, but if I ever see you again, I'll finish this." Without a backward glance, Clem scrambled to his feet and scurried away into the darkness, a pathetic coward swallowed by the prairie he had betrayed. Josie and Chayton retreated into the house, the heavy bolt on the door sliding home with a sound of finality. The fortress was now sealed. "How long do we have?" Chayton asked, his eyes scanning the room, assessing their position. "Not long," Josie replied, moving with grim purpose. "Thorne's camp is only a few miles away. He'll want to move before we can slip away. He'll likely wait for the last vestiges of light to fade, use the twilight to surround the house without being seen. An hour, maybe less." The fight was no longer about escape. It was about survival. They were hopelessly outnumbered. A frontal assault would be suicide. The tunnel was their only hope, but they needed to buy enough time to reach it and get away. Jedediah's study. Josie said a plan forming forged from her father's paranoia. He didn't just build a way out, he built defenses. They raced to the study. While Chayton barred the windows of the main house, Josie pulled out a heavy box from beneath her father's desk. Inside was ammunition, boxes of cartridges for her rifle and revolver, and something else, 4 sticks of dynamite with fuses and blasting caps. Jedediah had used them for clearing rock, though Josie knew he'd more likely used them for clearing out bank vaults. "Your father was a thorough man," Chayton remarked, looking at the explosives. "He was prepared for a siege," Josie confirmed. She grabbed 2 rifles, her own Winchester and her father's prized Sharps rifle, a heavy long-range weapon. "Can you use this?" she asked, handing the Sharps to Chayton. He took the rifle, his hands moving over it with a familiar ease. "I can." They worked in a grim, efficient silence, their earlier caution replaced by the focused energy of soldiers preparing for battle. They barricaded the front door with heavy furniture. They set up positions at the windows on opposite sides of the house, giving them overlapping fields of fire. The ranch house, once a symbol of Josie's lonely inheritance, was transforming back into what its builder had always intended it to be, a bastion against a hostile world. Josie looked out the window of the study. The last sliver of the sun had disappeared, leaving the landscape bathed in a deep indigo twilight. The wind had picked up, moaning around the corners of the house like a restless spirit. The world was holding its breath. Then she saw them, dark shapes detaching themselves from the deeper shadows of the hills. Not a column of riders this time, but a skirmish line of dismounted troopers, spreading out, forming a perfect, inescapable circle around the ranch. In the center of the yard, a lone figure sat on his horse, watching the house. Captain Thorne. The trap had been sprung. The serpent in the grass had done his work. There would be no more words, no more threats. By morning, the Bellwether Ranch would either be their tomb or the pyre of their desperate last-ditch stand. The twilight deepened, and the ring of blue uniforms tightened around the ranch house. They were methodical, creeping from one piece of cover to the next, the water trough, the woodpile, the corral fence, until the property was completely encircled. A voice, amplified by the unnatural quiet, boomed across the yard. It was Captain Thorne. "Josephine Bell, send out the deserter, Chayton. Do this, and you will not be harmed. I have 20 men here. You cannot win. This is your only chance to walk away from this with your life." Josie sighted down the barrel of her Winchester, centering Thorne's chest in her sights. He was just out of effective range, a calculated position. He was an arrogant man, but not a stupid one. "What is your answer, Scout?" she asked Chayton, who was positioned at a window on the opposite side of the house, the long barrel of the Sharps rifle resting on the sill. "My answer is the one my ancestors gave when they were told to surrender the Pahasapa," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "We were born here. We will die here if we must." That was all the confirmation Josie needed. She drew a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against her shoulder, its report cracking the silent air like a whip. The bullet kicked up a plume of dust a few feet short of Thorne's horse, a deliberate miss. It was her answer. A beat of stunned silence followed, then an angry shout from Thorne. "So be it, open fire!" The world exploded. The night was ripped apart by dozens of muzzle flashes, a storm of leaden hornets slamming into the wooden walls of the house. Splinters flew, and glass from the last intact window pane shattered, tinkling to the floor. Josie and Chayton dropped below the windowsills, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fresh-cut pine. They returned fire sparingly, picking their targets, making every shot count. This wasn't a battle to be won, but a delay to be bought. Every minute they held the cavalry off was another minute closer to the tunnel, another minute closer to a sliver of a chance at freedom. Jedediah Bell's fortress was holding. The thick timber walls built to withstand prairie fires and sieges absorbed the bullets. "They're trying to pin us down!" Chayton called out over the din of gunfire. "They'll send a team to breach the door." "Let them try," Josie grunted. She crawled from the study to the parlor, dragging a crate of ammunition with her. She peered through a crack in the barricade. She could see them, 3 soldiers hunched low, dashing from the cover of the corral towards the front porch. She waited until they were on the steps, their backs to her, as they prepared a battering ram. She fired twice. One man screamed and fell, clutching his leg. The other 2 scrambled back into the darkness, dragging their wounded comrade with them. A small victory, but it had cost her 2 precious bullets. The night wore on, a terrifying cycle of thunderous volleys and tense silence. Thorne's voice would occasionally cut through the night, demanding their surrender. His words laced with threats and promises he had no intention of keeping. Each time their answer was another carefully placed shot from the Sharps or the Winchester. Inside the house was a wreck. The air was choked with smoke, and the floor was littered with spent cartridges and broken glass. Josie and Chayton moved like phantoms in the dark, communicating with clipped sentences and hand signals, a 2-person army fighting a desperate war. A strange camaraderie had formed between them, forged in the crucible of the siege. They were no longer the outlaw's daughter and the hunted scout. They were simply 2 people against the world. Sometime after midnight, the firing intensified on the east side of the house. "It's a diversion," Chayton yelled. "He's trying to draw our attention." Josie raced to the west-facing window in her father's study. In the faint starlight, she saw the real threat. A small group of soldiers were using the darkness and the cover of the barn to approach the house from the rear, carrying something that looked like a bundle of rags and a can of kerosene. "They're going to burn us out," she said, her voice grim. It was the oldest trick in the book for flushing out a cornered enemy. Jedediah had always warned her, a fortress of wood is still just a box of kindling. "The tunnel," Chayton said, already moving. "It's time." Josie grabbed the sticks of dynamite and her revolver. Chayton slung the Sharps rifle over his shoulder. They met at the entrance to the tunnel in Jedediah's study. The firing outside was relentless now, a continuous roar. "Once we're in the tunnel, we need to block the entrance," Josie said, her mind working furiously. "Give us a head start." She looked at the dynamite in her hands. It was a crazy idea born of desperation. "I have a plan." She quickly explained it. Chayton listened, his expression serious, and then nodded once. "It is a good death song for this house." He slipped into the tunnel first. Josie lit the fuse on one stick of dynamite, her hand steady, despite the tremors running through her body. The fuse was short, 15 seconds maybe. She placed it beside the heavy desk near the tunnel entrance. Then she turned and scrambled into the dark opening, pulling the heavy bookshelf door shut behind her. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. They stumbled forward, their hands on the rough-hewn walls of the tunnel. Behind them, they heard a muffled crump as the dynamite detonated. It wouldn't destroy the house, but it would collapse the study, burying the tunnel entrance under tons of timber and debris. It had bought them their time. They navigated the tunnel by touch, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. It was a long, slow journey. Above them, they could hear the faint, rumbling sounds of the battle they had left behind, the sounds of their world being destroyed. They heard a new sound, a deep, angry roar, the fire. The cavalry had succeeded. The Bellwether Ranch was burning. The tunnel began to slope upwards. Ahead, Josie saw a faint glimmer of light. The exit. They pushed aside a cleverly disguised grate covered with brush and emerged into the cool night air. They were in a deep, dry ravine, just as Josie had remembered, a full mile from the house. Behind them, against the dark silhouette of the hills, the sky glowed a sickening orange. The Bellwether Ranch, her prison and her sanctuary, was an inferno. The legacy of Jedediah Bell was being consumed by flames vanishing into the night sky. They had escaped the siege. They had survived the Devil's Dawn. But as they looked at the pillar of smoke and fire, they knew they were not free. They were fugitives, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and a ruthless enemy who would now hunt them with a renewed, vengeful fury. Their war was far from over. It had just begun. The orange glow of the burning ranch painted the underside of the clouds as Josie and Chayton scrambled up the side of the ravine. Every cracking timber, every roar of the flames felt like a piece of Josie's past being violently torn away. She didn't look back. There was nothing left for her there but ghosts and ashes. From a high ridge they watched the smouldering ruins. They saw a lone rider break from the cavalry line, galloping hard toward Fort Meade. "He's sending for reinforcements," Chayton said, his voice grim. "He will telegraph every fort in the territory. By sunrise, we will be the most wanted fugitives in the Dakotas." Thorne would write the official history painting them as murderous renegades. The truth was now a casualty buried in the ashes with the ranch. They pushed deeper into the Black Hills, a place the soldiers saw as a hostile maze. But Chayton called home. Days bled into nights. He moved with the certainty of a man in his own church, teaching Josie the silent language of the wilderness, how to find water, how to walk without leaving a trace, how to listen to the wind. The soft edges of the rancher's daughter were burned away, revealing the hard, resilient core of the Outlaw's bloodline. Their destination was a half-whispered legend, a hidden valley her father called No Man's Land, a sanctuary for outcasts. On the third morning, their luck ran out. The jingle of cavalry equipment cut through the forest, quiet. Below them, a patrol of 4 troopers led by Sergeant O'Malley picked their way along a game trail. A loose pebble dislodged by Josie's boot tumbled down the rocks. It was a small sound, but it was enough. The troopers' heads snapped up and a finger pointed. The forest erupted in gunfire. Bullets whined off the rocks around them, pinning them down. It was a desperate, hopeless last stand. Chayton fired the heavy Sharps rifle, and 1 trooper fell, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. And then a new sound. A single powerful rifle shot from somewhere high above them. Sergeant O'Malley grunted, a look of surprise on his face, and toppled sideways from his horse. The 2 remaining troopers looked around in confusion, caught in a crossfire. Another shot rang out from the unseen rifleman, and a horse screamed and fell, trapping its rider. The last soldier, overcome with panic, turned and fled. Josie and Chayton stared at each other, bewildered. A figure emerged from the dense pines on the ridge above them. He was an old Lakota man, his face a road map of wrinkles, his long hair white. He held a Sharps rifle, the twin of Chayton's. As he approached, Chayton breathed a single word in awe: Black Buffalo. The old man's sharp eyes moved from Chayton to Josie, finally resting on the piece of quill work tied to her belt. "Jedediah Bell's daughter." Black Buffalo said, his voice like stones grinding together. It was not a question. "Your father was a hard man, but he was a man of his word. He told me if his daughter ever came to these hills needing help, I should give it. I have watched you for 2 days. You fight well." He gestured down the trail. "Captain Thorne will send more men, the whole army. You cannot stay here. Come, I will take you to no man's land." Josie looked from the legendary elder to Chayton, and then toward the empty horizon. The fire that consumed her home had not been an ending. It had been a baptism. It had burned away her old life and freed her from the ghosts of the Bellwether Ranch. Her future was an unwritten, dangerous path, but for the first time she was not alone. She was no longer just the outlaw's daughter. She was a survivor. And her story was just beginning. And so Josephine Bell and the Lakota scout, Chayton, vanished into the legends of the Black Hills, guided by an old ally of a man who was more than just an outlaw. They escaped the fire, but the world they left behind was still burning with the ambitions of men like Captain Thorne. Their story isn't just one of survival. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the only way to find freedom is to defy the world, trust a stranger, and embrace the wild legacy you were born into. It shows that true alliances are not forged by laws or uniforms, but by a shared struggle for justice in an unjust world. What did you think of Josie's choice? Would you have hidden a hunted man, knowing the full force of the U.S. Cavalry would come knocking at your door? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story from the unforgiving frontier gripped you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a classic Western drama, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of grit, betrayal, and survival from the Old West. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Thanks for listening.